building a stacked wall. We're taking a look at how the wall wants to look when it's all finished. And there are several ways to start or initiate this. But let's start with the levels first of all. So we know we have a level right here, which I would call the first floor. And let's change the name of this level to first floor. Okay, then I'm going to say yes to this. Would you like to rename the corresponding views? Because then my views over here will be similar to the levels. So I say yes. And now it's changed over here to first floor. And so starting from the first floor, I know that this is 1 foot, 1.5 inches. So I'll simply copy that down using the mouse to show direction and the keyboard to show the distance. Now I have another level, and that level also happens to be the top of the basement wall. So it's already starting to get a little messed up here. So if you click on the level, you see this little squiggly, I call it a cedilla. Click like that, and you can drag it down a little bit. And now I can still read all of my levels. This level, I'm going to call top of, TOBSMTWALL, top of basement wall. And now we have another level here. That's what I would call the grade level. The brick stops at the grade level, and that happens to be 10.5 inches lower. So again, copy. Mouse is showing the direction I want it to go, and the keyboard is telling me the distance. So now I have another level in there that needs to be cleaned up and out of the way. So I'll drag that down to here, and I'm going to call that the grade. So there's my grade level, and I think maybe I can drag it down a little bit more. Okay, so now I have these 3 levels put in here, and now I have a 8 foot 11.5 to the bottom of the basement wall. So again, I'm going to grab this level, copy, and come down. Mouse is showing the direction. Keyboard is showing the distance. And let's clean that up again too. So I'll drop that down a little bit. And this I'm just going to call the bottom of the basement wall. I could also call it top of footing, but as long as I understand what the names of my levels are, I can be fine with that, and that makes sense to me. So now the pad footing is going to be put in automatically by selection through the structure tab. So I don't need to put another level in for that, but I certainly could if I wanted to, but it won't help me make my stacked wall. So I've got these 3 dimensions, and now I have 10 foot 0 and 5/8. So my first floor level is 0. I can change the elevation here by just typing it, 10 foot 0 and 5/8 inches. And now instead of copying it or moving it, I just changed the value of that. So now I have my top of my first floor wall, and here's my bond. It's a foot, so I have to copy this again, 1 foot, and let's clean that up a little bit real quickly. And this level is the second floor. Okay. And now I have another one, 8 foot 0 and 5/8. The next level I want to put in there, I'll make that 8 foot 0 and 5/8. Copy that. 8 foot 0 and 5/8 inches. And now I have my next level, which is the top of the second floor wall, TO 2ND FL WALL. Okay, now let's see. I didn't change the name here. Level 2 is top of the first floor wall. So let's change the name of that. TO1STFLWALL. And yes again. Notice that when I change the name of a blue bubble, it's asking me if I want to change the name of all corresponding levels, because the blue bubbles mean that there's already a level made for that. And I'm changing the name. So now it says top of first floor wall over here. The black bubbles mean that there aren't any corresponding plan views of these levels. And sometimes you'll want those levels to be visible, and simply say, I want the bottom of the basement wall to be a plan. So I go over to the View tab. I come over to the Plan Views. I go over to the floor plan. And these are all the levels that are made that have the black bubbles. And I'm going to say bottom of the basement wall, I want that to be over here. So I'll just say, okay. And then boom, now I have a plan called bottom of the basement wall. I'm going back to one of my elevations because that's where my levels are displayed to begin with. When I draw sections, of course, those levels will be there as well. So now what do we need? I have to come back. I've got two other levels that I have to put in here. So I'm going to grab this one and I'm just going to copy it down 7 inches according to the plan. And now I don't want it to be shown over here. I want it to be shown over here. And I'm going to drag these guys closer. So grab this little grip here and drag them over because I don't need it to be that far apart. But this I'm going to call, that's a tough one because I don't really know what we would call that. So maybe I'll just leave it at level 8. And then I'm going to copy this one down 7.5 inches. And that'll be level 9, and that's fine. I'm looking for that little cedilla. Okay, maybe drag it down just a little bit more. All right, so the last thing I want to do is to make sure that my levels are all in the proper place. And that's easily done with the dimension. So in my quick access toolbar, I have this align dimension icon, or I could go over to the annotate tab and I have aligned dimension over here as well. If you don't have that in your quick access toolbar and you want it to be there, simply right click on top of it and say add to the quick access toolbar. And then it'll show up in your quick access toolbar. You can have the quick access toolbar below the ribbon, or if you click this little button, you can say show it above the ribbon. I like it below the ribbon, so I'm going to put it back there. But that's a personal preference. And as you work more and more on the Revit program, you'll find that there are certain icons that you, or commands that you use quite often. And so rather than going to a tab and then picking the icon, you just simply put it in your quick access toolbar, and that saves one little step. But the last thing I want to do now is just make sure I got all my levels. I've placed them all in the correct location. So I'm simply going to double check all of my dimensions here just to make sure. So we can grab this little dot and move our dimensions out of the way so that they aren't on top of each other, so it's easy to read. And everyone else can be read. Now, we don't really need the 0. So if I go up to manage, and let's say project units, let's see if that'll do it for us. And length. And down here it says suppress 0 feet. So if there's 0 feet, we don't really need to have a 0 in front of there. So I'll suppress the zeros. And now I just have the inches, because if it's 0 feet, we don't really need to say that. And I like that setting. So always a good idea when you get to a certain point to actually stop, save your project, If I get a phone call or an interruption before I go any farther, I just go over here and click the save button and then move on to whatever other task is interrupting this process. Or if I'm just taking a break, just going to stop for a second and look at what I did. While I'm looking at it, I'll go over and hit that save button. It's always a good idea. So it looks like we're okay. 8 foot 11 and a half, 10 and a half inches, 1 foot 1 and a half, 10 foot 0 and 5/8, 1 foot, 8 foot 0 and 5/8. Yeah, so everything looks good except I'll do these last two right here. Boom, boom, boom. Okay, and again, let's get them out of the way here. Just grab that little dot and move them off to the side. And 7 and 7.5 inches. So now I've started, I have all of my levels in there. I have all of my distances here. They correspond with what I want to have. And so now the next step would be to actually take a look at what are these walls made up of. They're tagged. So we're going to go take a look at the different wall types that need to be made. First of all, we're going to individually make those walls. And then secondly, we'll, using a stacked wall feature in Revit, we'll actually stack all of these different walls on top of each other and assign the value of these dimensions to the height of the different walls. And I think one other piece of information might be valuable to me, and that's what's this distance, because 8 foot 0 and 5/8 is the total height of this wall, but there are 3 components to it. There's wall type 7, there's wall type 10, and there's wall type 5. So I really can't tell right now what's the height of wall type 7. So I'm going to add another dimension in here. And a way to do that, to continue it along, is I'm going to click on the dimension and then come up to the edit the witness line button. And that will let me add another dimension inside, or which is attached to. So now that's one continuous dimension line. And the advantage of that is now if I want to move one way or the other, it's a continuous line. I don't have these first two that I put in as one line, dimension line or string, and then another dimension here, and I'd have to move them separately. So all of my dimensions are completely lined up. And now I know what the elevation is to be set at for wall type number 7. So now it's time to start building each wall type. So this is wall type 5. That's the first wall at the top. So I'll go to a floor plan. I don't have to actually draw the wall type on the floor plan. I just make it. But you need to be in a plan view in order to select the wall feature. So architecture, wall. And now I have a generic wall, so I'll edit that generic wall. I'll simply say, edit the type, and I'm going to duplicate it, and I'm going to call it wall type 5, so I don't have any problem identifying which wall type this is. And let's minimize this a little bit here, squeeze it down, and now we'll edit the structure. So I have one particular material here. It's the structure, which would be my 2x6 wood studs. So I'm going to change that to softwood lumber. So my cursor defaults right up to the search box, so I don't have to go click up there. I just type soft, and it comes to softwood lumber, and I say okay. So now I've changed this material, the 2x6 studs, to softwood lumber. A 2x6 is actually 1.5 inches by 5.5. So now I need to change the thickness of that material. Okay, so if we preview that, there's my wall. I like to look at it in section view. So you can look at it in plan view, which we're seeing right now, or you can look at it in section view. So now if I just scroll with my mouse, there's the wall that we have so far. It's number 2, it's structure. It's softwood lumber is the material, and the thickness is 5.5 inches. So now I want to add another material here. It's going to be outside. We don't need to show the air film. That's for heat loss calculations. But we want to put in this rigid insulation. The materials are stacked from the exterior side to the interior side. So right now I'm going to put in a material that's on the exterior side. I'm going to insert that and simply move it up. It's not really a structural material, so I'll change the function to a substrate. And I'm going to change the material again. I just click on it in this little box with the 3 dots in it, and I'll just type rigid. And there's my rigid insulation. I'm going to say OK to that. And the last thing I need to do is give it a thickness. It says it's 1 inch, so I'll change this thickness right here to 1 inch. And now I'm in section view. I'm looking at it, and here it is. I've layered my rigid insulation is here. My softwood lumber is here. Next thing I want to put on is this 3/4 inch plywood sheathing. So again, insert. And it's below the rigid insulation, so I use this down arrow. Now I'll come over here and see what we have available in plywood. So I'll type PLY. I have plywood sheathing, which is fine. Double click on that. It adds that material. How thick is it? It's 3/4 of an inch thick. So I'm going to do that. Okay. Now what's next? The insulation, that would be put in a detail element, not actually put the rigid insulation in there. It's taking up the same space as the 2x6 stud is, so we're not going to add that into our stacked wall. But the bad insulation is not, it's a detail, it's not a component that we need to put in at this point. And the last thing we want to put in our stacked wall is 1/2 inch gypsum board. So I'm going to insert another one. That's on the bottom, so let's move it down. And it's really a finish material, so we'll say finish. And we'll look for gypsum. We have some, double click on that. It applies that particular value of the material or type of material, and we're saying that it's a 1/2 inch thick. Okay, so let's see. Now it's flipped. This one is going from the outside to the inside. This is the outside to the inside. You could flip it. Not necessary. We'll worry about the orientation of that as we draw our stacked wall. So let's just take a look if we have everything. Rigid insulation is the first thing on the outside. Yep. It's 1 inch thick. Okay, that looks good. Click on it. You can see it. It highlights it. Revit highlights it. Looks good. Number 2, 3/4 inch plywood sheathing. Plywood sheathing. And we could say it's structure or not. I'll leave it like that, but that's debatable. You might rather have that be a substrate. But for now, we'll just leave it like that. Plywood sheathing. Let's click on number 2. There it is. It's highlighted. It's plywood sheathing, and it's 3/4 of an inch. Okay. Now let's go down to the next material, which is the structure. It's softwood lumber and 5.5 inches. So 2x6 studs. Yep. 5.5 inches. Okay. And then the finish is the gypsum board, which is a 1/2 inch. We can see it highlighted over here. And there we go. We don't have to put the inside air film. That's for energy calculations, giving these materials resistance values to the transfer of heat. And then we can calculate, knowing the area and the reciprocal of the R value and the change in temperature from inside to outside, we can actually calculate how many BTUs we're going to lose per hour based on the temperature differential from the inside to the outside, the reciprocal of the total R value, and the total area of this type of wall. So, okay, that's number 5. That looks really good. So we'll say okay to that. And I've made my first wall. I'll say okay to that. The next wall type that we want to make is number 10. We made number 5. Now we're going to make number 10. So number 10 looks like this. This is a typo. That should have been 5.5 inches. So we're going to make it correctly. It's 5.5. It's a 2x6 wood stud again. So what I want to do though is I want to use my basic wall because I've got a lot of the components in my basic wall that work in terms of building the next wall. So I'm going to use this one and edit it, duplicate it. I'm going to call it number 10 because it's a wall type 10 and say okay to that. And now let's take a look at the properties here and zoom in again on it. And what's different? Well, this wall actually has the 1/2-inch gypsum board. I already have that. It has the, actually it's supposed to be 5.5, so we have 5.5-inch wood stud. Yep, I've got that. And 1-inch rigid insulation. A 3/4 plywood sheathing is next. So we got the plywood sheathing, it's 3/4 of an inch. And then I have 1-inch softwood lumber. 1-inch rigid, I got the rigid insulation here. Yep, and then I have the 1-inch softwood lumber. So I need to add another row. And that's going to be really it's a substrate, but you could call it a finish and that would be fine. And again, I'm going to call it softwood lumber. So SOFT, softwood lumber. And this time the thickness is 1 inch. And there it is. Let's just double check. We checked all of these already. The only thing that we don't have there is the 1-inch softwood lumber. Softwood lumber, 1 inch. Okay, I've built my wall type number 10. Say okay, say okay. The next wall type that we need is type 7. That's right here. So let's go take a look at what wall type number 7 is made up of, and we'll make another wall and we'll just name it number 7 for simplicity. Okay, wall type number 7, here are the materials. It seems very similar to our previous wall, number 10. So let's edit that type, duplicate it. This time we're going to name it number 7 and say okay. Edit the structure, and let's compare what we have to what we have here to what we need over there for wall type number 7. So we ignore the inside air film, 1/2-inch gypsum board. Got it, that's number 7 here. 5.5-inch batt insulation, we don't have to put that in. 2x6 wood studs, softwood lumber, number 5, 5.5 inches, okay. 3/4-inch plywood sheathing, that would be number 3. We got plywood sheathing, 3/4 of an inch. 1-inch rigid insulation, number 2, rigid insulation, 1-inch thickness, okay. And number 1 is wood siding instead of softwood lumber. So let's go over there and let's see if we can find some siding. SIDING. All right, we don't have any siding over there. So let's make a new material. We'll click down right here, create new material. This one that's highlighted, so I'm going to rename it siding. And then I'm going to use this to go find some material in the main library. Revit doesn't add the entirety of its library of materials into the model because it's just so huge. We wouldn't likely we wouldn't use all of the materials. So now I'm going to the main Revit library, which comes with the program, but isn't automatically loaded into our model. And I'm going to look for siding, SIDING, and let's see what comes up. There we go. I've got shingle siding, horizontal siding, and clapboard siding. We'll just use this. And since I have it highlighted over here, if I simply double click on it, it adds the properties to the material that I just renamed. So now this is my material, that's my siding. And I'm going to say okay to that. It's now siding, and I'll say that it's 1 inch thick, so it matches with that softwood lumber that's up above. So now I just made wall number 7. I'll say okay to that, and okay to that. Working our way down, the next wall type is wall type number 6. So we're going to make a wall type number 6. If we look at wall type number 6, we'll notice that it has some similarities, but not complete. So I'm going to use my number 7 as a basic wall, edit that type, duplicate it. I'm going to call it wall type number 6 and say OK. Now let's compare what number 7 is, which number 6 is a duplicate of number 7 at this point. And let's see what the difference is. Well, the difference is that there's no softwood lumber for the studs, and there's no gypsum board. This is a bond. Now there's the rim joist we would put in separately, not here. If we put this in this part of the stacked wall, if we're going to do material takeoffs, we really need to draw the bond as a structural element. So the only thing that we're going to have in this wall is the wood siding, the rigid insulation, and the 3/4 inch plywood sheathing. So we'll have the siding, the insulation, and the plywood sheathing, but we're not going to have the finished material, which is the gypsum board, and we're not going to have the softwood lumber. But the core boundary has to have something in between. It has to have a material in between it. And so I have to move one of these. So I'll move the plywood sheathing down one. So now I have 2 materials between the core boundary, and I can delete my softwood lumber now, and there'll still be something between the core boundaries. So there we go. That's wall number 6. And we'll say OK to that. It has siding, rigid insulation, and plywood sheathing. This bond area has siding, rigid insulation, and plywood sheathing. As I said, we don't talk about the outside air. That's an energy calculation issue. We'll put the rim joist in as a structural element, so I'm not going to put it in there. And the fiberglass insulation, that's a detail component that we put in our drawings, but it doesn't actually represent, it's not a extractable piece of information. If we wanted to do a schedule of material lists, we wouldn't be able to list the fiberglass insulation here. We wouldn't do that. So anyway, that looks good. I'm going to say OK to that and OK to that. So we've built 5, 10, 7, and 6 so far. Now it's time to build wall number 4. So if we take a look at what wall type number 4 is, it has face brick, airspace, insulation, plywood, studs, and gypsum board that we'll put in our stacked wall. So let's use wall number 5 because it has some of those components in it already instead of 6. Edit the type, duplicate it. I think it's number 4 that we want to call that. So let's do that as 4 and say OK. Edit the structure. Let's move it over a little bit here. Zoom in on this. So what do we got here? Rigid insulation, plywood sheathing, softwood lumber, and gypsum board. What do we need over here? We need brick and an airspace. So insert, I'll insert to it. And this is a finish, so we'll call it finish. It's going to be brick, so we'll click on here and type brick, B-R-I-C-K. And we use the common brick, double click on it. So now we have the material in there, and it's 4 inches. It's really only 3 5/8. Okay. I've got double inches up there, so I'll just back off 1. Okay, so now look at that, brick, but I still need that airspace, so I'm going to come over here, and this is going to be an air layer. Let's see if we can get away with that. Let's see if we have a material called air. A-R. Yes, we do. I'll take that. Double click on it. That's assigned. And the airspace really is only 3/8 of an inch. So 3/8 of an inch. Depending on what this material is made up of, the framing, if it's metal or studs in New York, that airspace has to be 1 inch or 2 inches by code. A lot of people don't follow that code. So, and in Michigan, where I'm also licensed to practice, 3/8 would be considered enough. So let's take a look. We got our, again, I put that double in there. Okay, so let's see. Let's zoom in. Brick, airspace, rigid insulation, plywood sheathing, softwood lumber, and there. So now I've created wall number 4. Everything looks good dimensionally to me. Material-wise, it looks good to me. I'm going to say okay, and we've made another wall. All right, we've made wall number 4. Now it's time to make wall number 3. It's very similar to wall number 4, so I'm going to duplicate it and edit the type, duplicate it. I'm going to call it wall number 3. And let's take a look at what wall number 3 is made up of. Let's zoom in here a little bit closer. Wall number 3 has the face brick, which we have, the airspace, which we have, rigid insulation, 3/4 plywood. The rim joist is something that we would add as a structural material, and the fiberglass is a detail, so we can ignore both of those and notice that there's no gypsum board. So let's delete that. And let's move this structure down in only so that we have, when we delete number 6, which is the softwood lumber, we still have a material between the core boundaries. So we'll delete that. Now we've duplicated this wall, which is wall number 3. And so we'll say okay and okay. What's left? Wall number 2 and wall number 1. Now wall number 2, it does have some brick in it, so maybe we'll start with wall number 3 and duplicate it. So let's see what it's made up of. Okay, wall number 2 has brick, airspace, and concrete. I'm going to change that a little bit. So I'm going to duplicate this, duplicate wall number 3, and we'll call it wall number 2. Okay, and so let's take a look at what we have up above here. Well, all we have here is the brick, the airspace, and the concrete. I'm going to, because I made my brick 3 5/8, I'm going to change that to 3/8 inch airspace. I've already done that here, and then I'll add the 7-inch concrete. So let's change the structure right there to concrete. C-O-N-C, precast, lightweight, it's all fine. And how wide did we say it was? Well, I want the total thickness to be a foot. My total thickness right now is that, if I change this to 8 inches, what happens? Now it's 1'1". 3 5/8 is 4. What's that? Oh, there's no rigid insulation in there. So we're going to take that out. Rigid insulation is number 3. I can delete that. I get my total thickness of 1 foot. I'm getting some R values, the total R value across here, which we would use for energy calculations, but not for stacked walls, so to speak. So what do we have? The common brick and the airspace and the thickness of our concrete. We have all of the things that we wanted. I changed the thickness of my face brick to 3 5/8, and I changed the airspace to 3/8. So my concrete has to be 1 inch thicker than is showing here. So I made it thicker by it's 8 inches thick. Let's say okay to that and okay to that. We have one wall left to make. That's wall number 1. So let's look at the material that wall number 1 is made up of, make a wall called wall number 1, and then we'll be ready to make our stacked wall. Wall number 1 is simply 12 inches of concrete. So let's see if we have something like that, architecture, wall. It's always a good idea to save your project. And let's see if we have some 12-inch concrete here. foundation, 12-inch concrete. Okay, now I'm going to duplicate that, even though I'm not going to change it, because I want to call it wall number 1. I could rename it, but I don't like to change anything that has already been done, so I'm going to duplicate it and just change it to number 1. And say okay, and say okay. And now we've built all of the walls that are going to go into our stacked wall. All right, we've built all of the subcomponents of the stacked wall, and now we're going to start by actually making a stacked wall. Architecture tab, wall, over to the basic wall, drop it down. We'll scroll all the way down to the bottom, and Revit provides us with a stacked wall to begin with. So we'll use that as our beginning wall. We're going to edit the type, duplicate it, and we'll simply call it stacked wall, and say okay. Now let's look at the components of the stacked wall. We have 2 components. We have the brick on metal stud, and we have our exterior. So let's change the top. Remember, this is going to be the top, and this is going to be the bottom of the wall. So we'll change this to what? Well, let's see. What is the first wall that we have there? That's a 5. So we'll call that wall number 5. Scroll down till we find wall number 5, and click on it, and now that's wall number 5. Here, the next wall is number 10. We'll scroll down and we'll change that to wall number 10. And we want to add some more, so we'll insert, 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 insert. And the third one is going to be wall number 7. 5, 10, 7, 5, 10, 7. 6 will be the next one, so we'll make that 6. After 6 comes 4, so we're going to make this one 4. After 4 comes 3, so we're going to make that one 3. And we'll insert another one, which will be 2. We'll make that one 2. And we need another one, and we'll make that one 1. So we've changed the structure of this wall. Let's line them all up for the exterior face. So they're all lined straight up like that. And let's take a look. We've got all of our wall types in there. Now we have to pay attention to the heights of it. So I'm going to make wall number 8 the variable. We have in Revit, we have to tell Revit what the top of the wall is, constraint-wise, and what the bottom of the wall is, constraint-wise. And we're going to have all of these walls will have fixed heights to them, but Revit will change the height of this wall, which is the variable, in order to satisfy our constraints. If we said the bottom of this was the bottom of the basement wall, and this were 1,000 feet tall, the top of this was the 1,000 feet taller, what would happen is that we're going to set actual heights to all of these walls, and Revit will change the height of this wall in order to satisfy whatever our constraints are. So the first one we can see is 7 inches, so let's make that 7 inches. The second one is 7.5 inches, so we'll make that 7.5 inches. The third one is 8 foot 0 and 5/8 minus that, which I have to do the math on that, so I'm going to pass for now. And I did show that in a section there, but anyway, so wall number 6 is going to be 1 foot tall. And wall number 4 is 10 foot 0 and 5/8. Wall number 3 is 1 foot 1.5. Wall number 2 is 10.5. And I'm going to leave that one that I don't want to do the math in my head. I'm just going to say, okay. And I'm going to say, okay. And now I'm going to put that stacked wall in my model. So let's say architecture, wall. I'm going to use my stacked wall. What's the base constraint? Well, we know that's going to be the bottom of the basement wall. So we're looking for the bottom of the basement wall, BO basement wall. And the top constraint is going to be the top of the second floor. I've given it that level, so I'm going to say top of second floor wall, okay? And let's say okay to that. And I'm actually going to draw it in here now, all the way across. And so now I'm going to actually come and use a section through there and go to that view. And let's see what we drew. Using the fine resolution, I can see all of the components of that wall. I'm going to see, this is my south elevation. And what I want to do is drag my wall to the, so that it goes through the levels that I put in there. So I'm going to go, first of all, to the south elevation. And I can see the wall, but I guess I really want to go to east or west elevation. And I can see that the levels don't go through my wall, so I'm just going to drag that wall straight across so that it does in fact go through those levels. And now I can look here, it's 6 foot 10 and 1/8. So I'm going to edit this wall. I'm going to change this to 6 foot, what did we say? 6 foot 10 and 1/8. So that one wall that I didn't know, which is this one, we'll change that to 6 foot 10 and 1/8 of an inch. And say okay to that, and let's see what happens. Okay, what it's telling me now here is that my wall is shorter than my constraints are, but actually it's telling me that the wall, I think what it's telling me is the wall is higher than the constraint. So let's go back in and look at it again now. I need to change the height of this wall. I need it to be 6 foot 10 and 1/8 inches so that it fits inside of all of this. This is my basement wall. What's my total height of this wall all the way? From here to here is 30 foot 0 3/4. So I'm going to, first of all, change the resolution so I can see all of the materials. I'm looking at it in a, not in a section, but in an elevation. So this is my crop region. I'm going to increase the crop region until I can see my stacked walls and the levels, and I can see that with the details. Okay, so there's my details and my levels. And now I'm just going to type ZE, which will zoom to the extents. And maybe I can move this wall back this way a little bit so it's outside of that. So let's measure this all the way from the bottom to the top. 30 foot 0 3/4. Okay, I'm going to click on this wall. What did we say this distance was? Let's put that in here too now. From this wall has to be 6 foot 10 and 1/8. Okay, so let's try that again. Edit the type. 6 foot 10 and 1/8 is what we're going to have this be. 6 feet 10 and 1/8 of an inch. And everything looks good except for this top guy, which we'll fix once we make sure that the wall. So 30 foot 0 3/4. And I might have a mistake. Oh, 10 foot 6. Yeah, there's a mistake. It's the number 2 wall is, there's where my mistake is. 10 foot 6 is number 7. And number 7 is really, number 7 is really that, not 10 foot, it's 6 foot 10 and an 8. So whatever. Well, let's see now. Wall number 7. Oh, wall number 2 is really only 10 and a half inches, not 10 foot 6. 10.5 inches. And now we should be okay. I made a mistake there. Let's see what happens. Look at that, perfection. We take a look at the walls are all exactly, it's flipped, of course. It's all exactly what I want it to be, except for this top piece, which is the gypsum board doesn't line up. So we'll edit that one more time, edit the type, and this top guy has to be offset by some distance, I don't know. Let's say minus an inch and see what happens. Let's zoom up here. Yeah, it looks like it lines up now. So what I did was on my offset, I just moved it back an inch so that the gypsum board lined up all the way. Here we go. Here we go. And now everything looks beautiful. All right, let's look at it in 3D. We have this little house up here. There's the wall that we made. I can spin it around and take a look at it. And the last thing I need to do is put that little foundation on. So we come up to structure. We come over here to wall. It's 36 by 12, which is fine. And I'm just going to click on the bottom of that wall. And it's going to add that footing all the way across underneath that stacked wall. So that's what our wall looks like. We can make it realistic. It might be a little bit more difficult to see, but those are all of the components in our stacked wall. So now that I have the exterior wall of my house made, I can start going around and actually placing it in a plan. But this is our stacked wall.